Welcome, everybody. Thanks for being here. This is our series we're calling Workshape's Field Notes. On this series, we're talking about what's going on in the industry, what we're seeing and hearing, and maybe just a little bit of fun banner and conversation about what might be coming next, as much as we can all predict what's coming next. Today, I'm going to do a quick introduction, and then we're going to continue the conversation that Domino and I had with Andy Lake a couple weeks back on our Workshape Labs online event, which was called Rethinking Systems. And so we'll get into more about what that's about. But before we get started, I would love for the two of you to introduce yourselves to anybody who's watching who might not know who you are. So why don't we start with you, Domino, and then Shujaat, you can follow.
Well, thanks, Brett. It's nice to be here again and talking to you both. I am from Sydney, Australia, if you hadn't figured that out from my accent. I kind of call myself a recovering workplace designer. I've designed and delivered workplaces for roughly 25 years. And about 18 months ago, I kind of had one of those crisis moments that you periodically, I'm not going to call it a midlife crisis because that's blowing it. I suspect I didn't buy a car, I didn't get divorced. But what I did do is I quit my job without having anything else to go to, without having a very clear plan of what I wanted to do next. But having said that, I had a very clear and have always had a very clear vision of my purpose in my professional life, which is to help make work better for as many people as I can. And I used to do that through the creation of space, but I now run my own tiny little, just one person consulting business where I collaborate with others, which is lovely, to use my experience to help organizations make work better for their people. And that could be through space, but it could also be through coaching and programs and just building awareness of why putting a mandate in place probably won't help your people love their work or their workplace. So, yeah, that's me. Hi.
Awesome. Thanks, Domino.
Oh, thanks, Brett, for having me, and nice seeing you again, Domino. I am dialing in from Dublin, the one in California, which is in the Bay Area. So, Shujaat Ahmed here. My journey is, I'm a corporate anomaly, and that who shifted over to entrepreneurship. I call myself an anomaly because I've had multiple lives as a corporate employee where did not follow the convention of trying to go for safety, security, and status. I just kept shifting from oil and gas to supply chain to strategy consulting. And then about a decade ago, when I was really set in a career, I was like, I actually want to go help people. And I had this vision that if I help make workplace a platform to build purposeful and meaningful lives, we can actually fuel a more purposeful and meaningful society. So how do I become a secret activist in a company where I go help business leaders use data to figure out, hey, if you deal with talent, going to do well for business, but in there start planting ideas that will help certain agendas for us to get to better flexibility, better psychological safety and compassion for people. I did that at LinkedIn. I helped build and then scale like a very unique people analytics and future work team where we were ahead of the time, even before the pandemic, figuring out flexibility, and then post pandemic, figuring out and myth busting what works. And then I, like Domino, left without having anything else lined up because I just saw this wave that for us to really do well in the world, we need a different type of leadership. And so I've been on a vision to build like a school and a society of unconventional leaders. Focus on four things, right? How do we make people who want to do well for their teams stay relevant with AI? How do we help them become successful with future work, with hybrid work, with remote work? How do we help them become cultural brokers in these settings that are completely alien to companies? And then lastly, help them use these settings for themselves to become more purposeful in the way they're designing their careers. So happy to be here.
Awesome, Shujaat. Well, we all have this in common that we decided we kind of had enough of the status quo of what we had done and where we had come from and wanted to push the boundaries of really this, what feels like I believe truly this is a generational opportunity to reinvent what work means, what the word work means, and where we do it and how we do it and what it is we're doing when we're doing it. And all of that, in my mind, is up for debate right now and able to be shaped. So before we get into a couple of conversations on that topic, so as I mentioned a couple weeks ago, we had our second online session. It was called Rethinking Systems. We had Domino and another lovely gentleman from the UK, Andy Lake. We've been hosting these sessions with folks around the industry and outside of the industry. to kind of learn how to form unique perspectives that help us elevate the work we do, and hopefully all of you as well. All four of our sessions, they have four different areas of focus: human needs, systems, places, and technology. And the conversation a couple weeks ago touched on like a number of really interesting, and I think we were just nibbling on the edges of where this could go and how we can get into this idea of systems. And the word systems is kind of like the word teams. It can mean anything. But so we will really want to keep the conversation going. So we're here today to start to expand on that conversation, maybe get in deeper on some of these topics. I've got a few questions, but I'm open to any questions you two have as well. So I'm just going to get started. And Domino, we'll start with you. So to say work is being decentralized is kind of way behind the times, I think. And to the point Shujat made, I think all three of us were doing things ahead of our time, even 10 years ago, and coming up with ideas and new ways of working that maybe a lot of people weren't ready for yet. And now it feels, well, that's so long ago, and why aren't we doing things differently? And some companies are, but there are a lot of companies who the idea of decentralized work is like they have never even considered it, and they don't. And but I think most of the world is caught on to the idea that we don't all need to be in the same place at the same time. Work and teams are broken across multiple different locations. And I think if we are, and Domino, you said you feel that work is being liberated from place
Mm.
the last time we talked. So in this world of decentralized work and thinking about how we adapt to it, how should leaders be thinking about the role of place in today's work environment?
It's such a really good question. And it really isn't, I don't think that is being thought about anywhere near as much as the dreaded RTO frameworks
Mhm.
and mandates, and a kind of a focus on, if I can't see you, how do I know what you're doing? I mean, to even get into that question of starting to answer what do leaders do about it, I think you have to go back even further and you have to start looking at why we've built environments that look the way they do, and what is the management system or kind of process overlays that sit behind that. I mean, we're dealing with a legacy way of working that evolved roughly 100 years ago. Henry Ford started to bring scientific method, which was pioneered by Frederick Taylor a little bit earlier than that. He brought that into his factory floors, and he was establishing what the most effective production line methodology was. And then he extended that into what does the office floor look like, and how many hours do we ask them to work, which maximizes the minimization of error. And so that's why we've got a 5 day, 40 hour, Monday to Friday, 9 to 5 working week. It's because Henry Ford and others like him figured out that was the most effective, least error prone amount of work for humans in a kind of a command and a control environment. And if you think fast forward over the last 100 years of that, to expect that not only that, so the workplace has physically kind of evolved, right? So particularly in the more progressive, started in the Netherlands, maybe in the 90s, activity-based working started to come in, which is
Right.
the idea that a singular desk or one, let's call it one work setting, couldn't possibly provide all the functionality that an individual needs during their day, their week, their year of working, that you need different settings for different tasks. And the desk isn't the perfect place to have a meeting, and a meeting room isn't the perfect place to do quiet, concentrated work. And a cafe isn't a great place to read a report that you need to analyze. So I think if the workplace has physically evolved, I would say that management styles haven't necessarily evolved as fast. And of course, I'm being broad in that setting, but I think one of the reasons we've got so much friction in terms of workplace, work attendance, purpose crisis, trust crisis, engagement crisis around the world, particularly in knowledge work environments, is because leadership thinking about how to manage and lead in a world of hybrid and distributed work, not only hybrid and distributed in terms of I'm at home, I'm in a client's office, I'm traveling for work today, or I might be
Yeah.
working from the office, but also just I'm not at my desk. I mean, I still come across leaders who have the opinion that when they can't see their people, their default response is, well, then they're not working. I mean, they could be in a meeting room. They could be offsite with a client. They could be traveling for work. They could be working from the couch. They could be working from your own couch in your own workplace. So, management by walking around, and I heard it yesterday at a conference where there was an example that was cited. It wasn't anyone in the room, but there was an example cited of a leader who would walk the floor regularly and could just tell from what was on screen. So if it was, I think the example was Python or Excel or even Photoshop, depending on the type of work that you do, I know you're working, but if you've got Netflix on, if you're doing Grand Tour Auto or whatever, you're not working. But I can see that because I can glance at your screen. And that's really hard as an equivalent when you're remote. How do I tell? Is it the green dot? Have you guys been green dot stalking? Like the minute you're off a phone or a Teams call or a Zoom call or
Oh
whatever,
yeah, yeah.
and 5 people message you, instant message you, and your phone rings and it's, were you watching me? So I think manage like before we start worrying about where work is done, I think we need to really have a look at next generation leadership. And it shouldn't be called next generation because it really should just be leadership. But for the sake of it, let's just say that leaders need to learn how to let go of line of sight management. They need to let go of unconscious bias and, hey, I grew up this way and I always had an office and therefore it's good for me and it must be good for everybody else. I hate to say it, but the acceptance that different people work different ways and diversity of space, diversity of style, diversity of process even, and let's my daughter's autistic, so I'm really conscious of different people think different things and absorb
Mhm.
information differently. I think we need to get to a point where just that level of understanding of, let's call it the system of work at the people end of the spectrum, needs fixing way before the physical places need fixing. And in fact, I would argue that you can't really write a brief for a new physical workplace until you've properly examined the earlier upstream conversation about how work is being managed, led, and distributed at the org and the team and the individual level. Because that answer leads to the second answer of then what does my workplace need to look like? So doing one without the other doesn't really improve anything. Apologies, that was a very long answer.
That was great. Well, Sujat, I want to. So when I think about the organization, the systems that go into an organization, and there's the top level. This is what we're about. This is what this company does. This is our culture. This is our ethos. It seems like the rubber hits the road when you talk about teams and what teams actually get done. And this idea of managers, line of sight management. It feels like all this comes to team agreements. Andy brought it up in the last session. We talked about it a little bit, but it feels. I would love, Shujat, your perspective on how do we get more people to consider that team agreements are actually a very successful organizing and working together as a team without having to put hard and fast rules like you must do this and you must do it this way. But it's more about, especially if team agreements are built around outcomes and what we're doing as a team. But I don't know. Tell me if you disagree. I like do team. It feels like team agreements. It's like that's manageable. If it's at a level of 20 people or less, I feel like you can create those agreements and kind of align on them. If it's a 250 or a 500 person or a 2,000 person organization, how could you ever align on one system and say work happens from this hour to this hour and we do these things and we use these, we only use Excel and not Photoshop and we only do this and not this. I think that's a to the expand on the leaders that you talked about, Domino. It's like leaders leading differently with a new set of tools that I think most leaders have never even considered using.
Absolutely. And I'll context that with Domino. I think in the call, I'd also mentioned Taylorism and how, like, with the start of the assembly line, one of my all time favorite movies is The Seabiscuit. Not because I'm into horse racing, but I think it's one of the most beautiful stories told around a horse and three humans who, in a recession, the Great Recession, building hope. And it's a true story and actually has a lot of analogies for what we're facing with AI right now. But in that story, there's like a minute clip that they explain the entire recession. And the wording used is they show the assembly line and they show how artists, creative people were now knob turners. And the line they use is, in a moment, this was the beginning and end of imagination. Right. So the moment we put in the assembly line, we want to, the team structures we've put in, if you look at the naming of team structures as well, they all flow from the army, right? So we've put these structures in that are mostly for command and control. And then when we come down to team, to your point, Brett, about 200 people or 20 people, we have actually never defined what a team is,
Mm.
right? We've taken team as what is an HR org chart, what we've put to make it easy to manage. So you could be an entire function that could be a team, versus teams are group of people come together, and in the future group of people and robots come together. They're solving a common outcome, and in the process of doing that they bring their skills, They grow as a result, as a team, and the individuals grow. And there are not any fixed boundaries for it, right? So when we come to team agreements and team norms, I think it is about what is that one common outcome that you need a set of cross functional people to deliver. And in there, you'd then decide, okay, what are our norms in order to get there? And those norms involve three aspects, right? One is the intentionality. What are we trying to achieve as an outcome,
Mhm.
right? And what gets us there from a skill set perspective? Who is providing that skill set? Where are they located? When can they work? And from there, you're like, okay, this does not work if we don't blend in connectivity. If the folks are not interconnected, not just in terms of relationship, but also in terms of work, that their work is interdependent on each other, we won't be able to deliver this outcome. And then the last part, which is I think what we got into, which I would call as team agreement, is the rhythm part. We understand that the individuals on this team, they all have different needs for a rhythm. They could work in different hours, right? They may have like family needs, they may have like neurodiversity needs, but there's a rhythm that the team needs to operate on, right? Which is, but you can balance both together through common collaboration hours, right? Having a healthy balance of asynchronous communication. Not everything needs to be asynchronous communication like a meeting. So coming back, I think team agreements starts with team norms. What are the norms we want to set to get the outcomes delivered? Who are the people? What do they bring to the table? What is the level of connectivity we need between them, right? And then let's figure out what are the rhythms. And I know this is easier said than done because we all want to take a shortcut, right? The rhythm part is so key because anytime you add someone to that team or someone leaves that team, you are a brand new team, by the way. What that means is you have to reset not your norms, but you have to reestablish that these were the norms we all established. Here's how we operate. We have someone new added. How do we manage their rhythm as well, right? And then like reset, okay, let's remind everyone what's our baseline for operating there. We don't do that right now. I think that is the way to go. Team norms and team agreements. I did it for my team. I've seen a lot of successful teams do it. Where the issue comes in, where team agreement becomes a someone sitting in a center writing a policy for the head of the team and saying, well, here's a policy, how everyone's going to follow it. No one's going to read this policy later on. We're not going to follow it in practice, right? But when something screws up, we will come back and say, by the way, you violated a policy, hence no remote, everyone back into the office, right?
Yeah.
But it is a key lever.
Well, I wonder, and as you're saying this, I'm thinking about life as a consultant. And I spent most of my career, other than the 8 years that I was in the corporate world, I spent it as a consultant, either an architect or designer or consultant. You might have 5 different clients that all have 5 different rhythms, that have 5 different methods of communication, that have 5 different levels of expectation for how you speak with them, when you speak with them, what deliverables you have. And if you're good at what you do, you're a chameleon, and every one of them you meet with, they feel like you get them and you're connected to them. In the corporate world, people are now on 2, 3, 4 teams. If people are good, the really good ICs and people on team are like on everybody's team because everybody wants them. What I keep seeing happen is if you run into the problem of multiple leaders with their own norms and their own rhythms, and they start to overlap and intersect, if those people are really good, they do the same thing a consultant would do, and they figure out how to manage all of it, and they find a way to weave it all together. Most people just say, I can't. Like this doesn't match this. I'm not going to operate until this gets fixed. And I think that's part of with large companies. I'm seeing a lot of that. It gets to a point of stalemate between leaders, and which is when exactly what you said, Shujaat, the executive comes in and says, you know what? I'm tired of all this. Just everyone come in every day and then we don't have to deal with it. And that's why I keep thinking, how do we get past that? How do we get to a place where it's beyond, because I think everyone's going to try, if the things you're doing are great and it's making the company money, they're not going to ask questions and they're just going to be fine with it. It's when there's an issue or problem, then they start looking and they look more closely, and then they start getting nervous. And then every time there's an issue, then they start blaming it on, well, it's because I can't see you and I don't know what you're doing. And
Yeah, and
this,
Domino, can I add something? For you're about to head into is like we are in a macroeconomic situation we're headed towards, most likely a recession, right? As we're seeing it. The funny part is one is, I think, people have leaders have equated the high cost of coordination in their mind and discounted the value of connectivity that it can deliver, right? So they think coordination is so difficult amongst so many other teams and bring people together. Easiest thing is make one policy, get everyone in, forgetting that what are they missing out on that, right? And this is a prerequisite, by the way, for AI. Because if you haven't really figured out how the norms work, right, how you manage everyone else, this is exactly what you need for AI, because you will no longer be a domain expert. You will have to be a cross domain expert, and you will have to be on multiple teams at the same time, which we know we're not used to right now. Sorry, Domino. Go ahead.
No, it's all really good. I mean, one of the things that occurs to me is that with flexibility comes complexity. Okay. If you are in a very direct system, there is very little complexity. If everybody used to be mostly at work, mostly 5 days a week, I know that's not the reality of 2019 and the 100 years before, but say it was, right? It was easy to predict where people would be. It was easy to predict when people would be working. And that gives a certain level of a lack of stress about that, and an ability, I think, to concentrate on other things. And so when you come in and you disrupt that system and you set all the plates flying, and you can no longer rely on somebody being at a place in time or doing a certain thing for a person in a physical place, I think with all the other things that are going on in life, let's just say that kind of the world feels like it's on fire constantly. Like I've totally detoxed myself. I'm trying to detox myself from social media. I don't read newspapers and I don't watch the TV news. In fact, I rarely watch the TV. I will only watch streaming. So I can't deal with the ads. I can't deal with the editorials. I can't deal with this constant sense of drama and trauma. It's not healthy for me. And so
Mhm.
I kind of feel like if that's what's going on in the world, if we bring it back into the workplace, kind of what's need is some level of predictability. Have you guys read the three body problem? It's also been
Mhm.
turned into a thing. So it is the most fundamentally scary and amazing trilogy or books that I've ever read. It is phenomenal. And the idea that, when you've got three celestial bodies circling each other, the gravity, the kind of the interplanetary physics between these bodies in space is just far too complex for anybody to predict where they'll be at any one point in time. And I kind of think we've got a three body problem in the workplace at the moment. It is so
Yeah.
complex. You cannot predict. And as much as I'm going to come out and say, I am really worried about AI. I'm worried about AI from the point of view of kids who grow up and use it for their educational purposes. Like, for example, your English teacher says, write me a short story, and they can't do that. And they use AI to write a short story. They'll never learn how to write a short story. And if you multiply that example out, before you know it, in a generation or so, we'll have a bunch of people who are in charge of the world who don't know how to write a short story because we've outsourced creation and generative information to an AI. And what happens if that AI doesn't want to work for us anymore? So I'm going to put that to one side because that's a little bit doom and gloom, but I am absolutely really worried about that. But at the same time, I reckon one of the answers to this workplace three body problem that we've got is to use AI to help nudge us, people, humans, into making better, more informed, more rewarding decisions on when to be at work. So the current problem is that if I want to meet with my team and my team is any more than you two other people, how am I supposed to do that? Team level agreements are great, but what happens if somebody steps outside of that because they've got a toothache and needs to go to the doctors, right? You've got variability coming up from everywhere. If everybody agreed to participate in putting their intention into an app and then using the power of AI to grab all of that data from either within a single workplace or a floor or a team or an entire organization around a planet, you could be able to say, hey, I feel like going to work on Wednesday. Who else is going to be there? Is that worthwhile for me or should I make it Thursday? Because we can't currently as humans gather that information ourselves anymore. It's too complex. So I feel, and that's just one example, if we let AI help us make better decisions, we might be able to reduce some of the complexity and have some anchors on which we could base good decision making. And I think that's one of the fundamental problems at the moment. And that's why mandates seem such like a simple solution to an incredibly complex problem, which is how is my visit to the office going to be rewarding? More so than staying at home, because that's the fundamental choice people are making. It's actually more rewarding to stay home because I get my work done, which leads us to the next big problem, which is the focus on individual productivity. Of course, we're more productive individually at home because hopefully there's no one standing over your shoulder looking at you, and you're not distracted by the water cooler moment or the serendipitous bumps. But the problem is we're not all employed for individual productivity. At a certain point, we have a duty and responsibility to the greater whole, whether it's our team, whether it's the organization. We need to drive value through things that aren't programmed and aren't solely individual pursuits. And the only real way to do that, you can do it if you know all the people you already need to connect with and might have valuable information. But the minute, as you guys said, the minute somebody new comes, the minute I've got a new team, and sometimes I don't even know I've got a new team because I haven't met the person yet. But the minute that happens, you can't really be as effective remote as you can be in person, building networks, relationships, finding out things that you didn't know you needed to know, and opportunities that you didn't know existed can be grasped. So in person has got to be better for all of that. You just have to make people want to be in person as opposed to you have to force them. And I've got some thoughts about that too, but I'm going to stop now.
Yeah, 100% on the, and I think a couple things. One, Carl Sagan predicted exactly what you talked about with children. And he said, we're going to reach this point where either we're going to basically forget how to do everything.
Yep.
And then we're going to the dark ages
Yep.
again, or we are going to figure out how to overcome it. And what that he was saying, well, what was that in the 70s that he was saying these things? And we're here on this whole conversation of individual productivity, because I think it's convenience. I talk about this a lot. It's about personal convenience and what allows you to do all the things you need to do, which at the end of the day, human beings are, while a lot of us are pretty altruistic, we're also programmed to look out for ourselves and take care of ourselves. So we're in this world. This is why I'm curious your thoughts on this, Shujaat. We haven't talked, I don't think we've talked about this before, but to me, the productivity side of thing becomes less of a conversation when AI is doing the productivity things for me. Like, meaning I don't write that thing anymore. It now writes it for me. And my old measure of productivity was how many of these things how many articles can I write today? Well, how many articles can I get AI to write today? Now it's going to be how many new directions can I push the AI tool in to create that content? And it's going to be a measure of the quality of my outputs versus the quality of your outputs, which is no longer really about productivity. It's about the quality of the experience or the new ideas. I don't know. I haven't really shared this with anybody. I've been thinking about it. I'm curious what you two think, and if that resonates at all, because then that we're past this point of, well, you have to come in because we haven't been productive. We haven't been hit. Well, it's not.
Absolutely. Domino, you were going to go ahead.
No, you go.
Okay.
You go.
Okay. So this fear, let me hit that with, I think, two things the Domino sparked, right? One, I love she talked about complexity because there's a framework I use to help leaders. It's like, define what's complex versus what is complicated. And a lot of the time we confuse them, right? So complex is uncertainty. We don't know about this, right? The pandemic happened. What's gonna happen? What are the predictions? That's uncertainty. We know the best forecasters, even in the best of conditions, can't go beyond 12 months. So you can't forecast uncertainty. What you could do is you can turn that unpredictability, put some guardrails to it, and make it complicated. Complicated is where problems which are like a coordination problem, optimization problem. And similarly here, what team agreements or team norms do is they turn that uncertainty into a complication problem, not a complexity problem. What they say is, okay, we're going to put some guardrails, and now we can use AI. Forget AI. 2011, I joined Deloitte Consulting. It was like 14 years ago. As someone new to consulting, they had a hoteling software. You would come in, squat in a place, right? And you have to block your spot. And being an eager beaver, new person to consulting, I would just book my spot every time. Till I learned through the grapevine that if you are constantly using this hoteling system, you will be perceived as someone who hasn't made it into consulting. Because those who build a network, they just connect with each other. They use BBMs. I was in Canada, so BlackBerry. And we're like, We just connect, hey, we're all huddling up in this one room. I found one room, everyone else show up. If you find that group, that means you've succeeded in consulting because you've now found a tribe. So we figured it out without having any system. Now you have actually AI, and there's a lot of vendors that I actually am advising who are using AI to make this coordination so easy for you, right? And team norms so good for you. I think where the key part which makes or breaks this is the team leader. Team leaders are supposed to be friction fixers. There's good friction and then there's bad friction, right? Bad friction is this coordination. Sometimes there's good friction where, like it in my consulting days, they wanted you to reach out and connect with people because it's going to build a skill in you that they need long term for that business, right? So there's good friction. We're like, yeah, just reach out to people, figure out where are people congregating, figure out people for help, right? So that's it. Coming back to you on AI, I believe individual productivity mostly gets used for blame game, whereas team productivity is what you use for outcome and ownership.
Yeah.
So if you look at OKRs, right, objectives, key results, they cascade down at the team level. And then we make the mistake of trying to cascade it down further individual level. No, I shifted around for my team. I said we have team OKRs. Everyone has adds something to it. Our success is based on, do we deliver these team OKRs? Because if you do that, then we earn the right for all the flexibility we have as individuals, right? So I think we're headed, especially when you think about AI. AI is not going to be a tool for an individual. It is going to be a team member in a team. Like that's how this is going to be. For now, we're doing parlor tricks and we're using it for individuals, more activities and stuff. But to your example, Brett, rather than focusing on how many articles are right, it's about what's the outcome I wanted to get out of that content creation and how best can we get there using whatever tools we have. So it ends up being a team outcome, which goes back to again to flexibility that we talk about. We're so much focused on FaceTime and people showing up versus the actual outcome they achieve from wherever they work. And I'll wrap up with a joke I've made with Brett before when we were working together as well. I think one of the best solutions is, I think we should hire actors, put them around executive leaders. Whenever they come to the office, they should just laugh, right? Just to just laugh and let them know that, hey, innovation is happening and productivity is happening and we're all having a great time. And all most of the problems will go away.
So instead of crisis actors, we're going to have what? Optimistic. What is the name for that? I love that. Positivity actors. I don't know. How good would that be in a workplace? I mean, I think what we're all talking about here, and this is not a problem of knowledge work or any particular organization. This is a societal shift, right? So society is shifting toward a much more kind of, I don't want to say introverted, but a much more me first, you second way of being, right? That's been happening for many years now. And I don't see that stopping anytime soon. And I think that is one of the reasons why so many leaders are leading in an old style way, because it's all about them in their minds. It's about their levels of control. It's about their levels of perceived success or maybe my own personal brand. I think one of the big failures of the disruption through the COVID eras is that we've kind of patted ourselves on the back in April 2020 when most organizations shifted to remote work overnight and business kept going. I feel like there were so many, yay, we can do this. This is great. We can sit on 40 hours of Zoom calls a week. Aren't we great? We can hold partner conferences online for 3 days solid. Aren't we great? I think the the adoption of digital workflows through software that was available at the time, that was great. That changed. 30 years of digital workflow change happened literally overnight. But we didn't have the corresponding change to practice. It kind of stopped at technology adoption. And that's why we're in a kind of a Jekyll and Hyde two-speed economy, if you like, in workplace, because technology and process has changed, but human processes have not changed. And I want to talk about psychology a little bit, because I think if you go into the neuroscience of autonomy and freedom, a lot of people felt, even though through the lockdown years we lost the freedom to leave our homes, we actually had a freedom of work. We could actually sit on the couch. We didn't have to be at the work setting in the home or wherever we did it. We could get up from our desk and put a roast on in the oven and have a nice meal in the evening rather than having to get something on the table in 20 minutes for the kids because they needed to be in bed. There were all sorts of positives to having some choice and autonomy in where and when we did our work, even though we might have been constrained. And after lockdowns lifted, that freedom and choice only multiplied. And then mandates and RDOs start to come, return to office mandates start to come back into play. And if you think about a child, you give a child a lolly or a toy and it plays with it, and then you take it away from it, what's it going to do? Is it going to say, no, that's fine. No, it's good. I understand, Mum. You need to do your job. I get that. You don't want to do it differently. No, they're going to have a tantrum. I want my lolly back. And I feel like that's a lot of what's going on now. So if you start implementing return to office mandates, you take away choice and autonomy. You imply that you don't trust the individual to be making good choices that work for them, their team, and their organization. Then, of course, people are going to get upset at that. They're going to feel like they're losing. And once you feel like you're losing, you're probably going to fight back. You can put all of the mandates you want in place. They're rarely going to be followed well. And then you get into this horrible situation where managers have to implement something that the boss says they need to do. They themselves don't agree with it. They know their team aren't going to comply with it. And rather than having good friction because of where people work, you've instead got really bad friction that is completely unnecessary. And if you put in a little bit of structure that allows a lot of freedom and a lot of choice and a lot of we, not I, if you try and get people to focus on the we first before the I, then I think you can start to make some steps forward.
And Brett, if I may add, I think the key
Yeah.
part, so there need to be incentives, right, from leaders to do this. But I think a counterbalance is the measurements that you're using, right? So for example, for some of the teams we worked with, I used like ONA, which is organizational network analysis. And through there, rather than asking people what they feel in a survey, because that could be gamified by leaders as well, we said, let's look at actual behavior. And we looked at silos. We were able to look at how strongly people have ties, right? So without looking at individuals, but just seeing what the clusters are, and also looking at where people don't have strong ties, which we know is a prerequisite for innovation, right? If you're already operating in one team. And where we myth busted, I remember, and I still do with some of the leaders, is they would hold an offsite. Everyone gets together, massive hours of download from a speaker. And they're like, great, we had a great time. All of us connected on LinkedIn. We connected so well. And then we would go back and show them data on saying, by the way, you didn't increase any new ties because the same people got together, by the way, and in their silos. So you actually risked innovation. Number two, we're like, this entire event, if you were going to give people a download, could have been done offline because during the pandemic, we figured out we could do it virtually. When you got them together, we should have focused on where the cross-functional teams do not have strong ties together. You should have sent them on a hike. You should send them on something else to discuss a problem and get refueling of these ties and break down silos. And I think these measurements are now easier to do. Once you bring those in, it myth busts. But it comes back to if the leaders are intentional enough to look at those and then say, okay, that's my intention of even designing events such as like a team event.
I just met with a person 3 days ago who founded a company about it. I think in the last year, it's about hiking. And all she does, all of her things are taking teams and executives on hikes to start the process of their conversation. And they do these things where they start and she gets to the trails. She takes all their devices, phones and watches, anything that has a notification, which she says really freaks people out. And yeah, her name is Jessica D'Angelo, and the company is called Hike to Become. And she said it's pretty magical what happens, the level of connection that people have in that setting. And for her, she said it was going on hikes regularly. She realized the one time in her life where she was completely clear of mind and able to really focus her thoughts was when she was on hikes and when she was out kind of away from all of the things that come with life. And anyway, interesting you say that. I would love, like, the strong ties, weak ties thing I think is super important. What can you define what use like what is a strong tie versus a weak tie? Because I think that's something we can get into even more.
Yeah, so think of strong tie as people that you actively collaborate with, right? So could be through email, could be like through chat, or people you work with, you share documents with, right? Strongly. Weak ties are people that you don't act regularly collaborate with. You may meet them once in a while. You may not have had history of connecting with them as well. These could be ties that you once in a while meet up for mentorship, or you run into them, let's say in a cafe, in an office, in the line you met someone that you may have met a couple of months back, and it sparked ideas. And the way it's measured is based on the volume of collaboration activity between people,
But that
and then
current
you can.
moment, it doesn't you could have a strong tie and then it can become a weak tie because you're not seeing that person regularly.
Oh, absolutely. And you can,
Okay.
so depending on what tool you use, you could do it over the last year. So let me get into a nerd out around this. So there's two ways of doing this. One is called an active ONA, which is that right now we ask you in this point in time, Brett, who are the people that you connect with, right? There's passive ONA where we're like, you don't need to give us any information. We see over a trend of time where the tires are going. The
Mhm.
active ONA, what you give in this point in time is actionable for now, but it doesn't tell me the trends. So, where the trends play out, for example, during the pandemic, people leaving and losing their sense of belonging was very closely related to the loss of strong ties turning into weak ties, right? So, this is actually very actionable because when you share this with leaders, they're like, okay, what do I do? I'm like, you don't need to worry about where the ties are. You need to worry about creating an environment, being a curator of experience that refuels these ties, right? Imagine being back at our common employer, so many ideas sparked by me being in the line, in the cafe, and frustrated why there's a long line. But in that frustration, in that friction, start chatting with people around me. And we had new ideas come up, right? So that's an idea. So strong ties versus weak ties. And I'll wrap up. The innovation research says, which actually now has been proven externally by LinkedIn as well for our on the LinkedIn platform. The weak ties lead to opportunities, new opportunities. The weak ties are what define innovation. If you take at the team that built the GPT, that whole framework and research paper at Google, perfect example of diversity and weak ties coming together in one platform without an agenda and just sparking a new purpose and then
I'd
turning into strong.
I'd also introduce, if you've ever heard of Dunbar's numbers.
Mhm.
Robin Dunbar was this British researcher and anthropologist, I think he was. And in the 90s, he realized that there was a correlation between the neocortex, the frontal brain, and social group sizes in primates. And so he decided to analyze it in humans. And he found that around about 150 is the number. It's called Dunbar's number, although there are various numbers below that and other numbers above it. 150 is about the high watermark of strong ties, both strong and weak, that you can keep in your mind. 150 people, if you can think of a group that big, you wouldn't know all of them deeply, but you'd probably recognize their faces. Once you get a group larger than that, you start to become strangers. You'd pass somebody in a larger group than that in an airport and not necessarily recognize them unless you had a conversation with them. So that 150 number is critical in terms of you started talking, Brett, about defining teams. One of the
Right.
current trends, or maybe not current anymore, but over the last 10 years, particularly in Australia, we've had developers build super big floor plates. In Australia, it would be something like 2 or 3,000 square meters. The problem with such large floor plates is, yeah, they're great for effectiveness, right? You can say we can stack all these people on there. They're all going to mill around and bump around. We're going to dissolve the silos. It's going to be quicker. We're not in the lifts or the elevators or the stairs. The problem is that once you put people in such a large group, you actually start to get the amygdala, the lizard brain at the back, which controls your flight and fight response, slightly triggered because your peripheral vision is very powerful as a human. Even though we have front facing eyes, our peripheral vision alerts us to danger. So if your brain senses that there's a stranger coming, somebody that you don't recognize their face or their gait or their clothes or the way that they're walking or whatever, you'll start to feel anxious. You might not realize it, but you can't get into a deep sense of flow. You can't be as productive as possible when you're in an environment where you don't feel safe. And I mean that subconsciously. No one's coming at you with a knife. But that's
Mhm.
also why you can't, as an architect or a designer, you can't put people with their backs to corridors because they feel under threat. So there's so much in terms of understanding group dynamics that also hasn't been factored into leading teams and accepting that we've all got differences, but also setting up our physical places for success as well. I mean, I feel like designers should know a lot of this stuff. This is evolutionary psychology 101, right? But it's not taught, I don't think.
Yeah, well, I don't think it is at all. And I think I would love to finish with getting into place and something specific that I've brought up before and I've talked about a lot. I really want to know your opinions on this. So, in this idea of think about strong ties, weak ties, Dunbar's number, because I've had more executives that I can count tell me I want a large floor plate so I can see everybody. And I've had more of this. We're not going to run into everybody unless we're all in the same building. I recently had a conversation with somebody, one of the largest companies in the world who leads workplace, saying that, asking my opinion and saying, well, I mean, my new leader thinks that it would be good if we have distributed locations that are close to where people live and let them come in. But I think we're missing on the energy of the whole company, of everybody coming together. And her response to me was, well, but they're not even going to see each other. And it's overwhelming. And should they be in a place that they feel comfortable with? And to the point, trying to tie back together, Shujat, to your point about innovative products happening in lines. And some of those lines at LinkedIn, you can thank me for, because I really pushed back against apps to kind of make lines go away because I felt there was a lot of value in them. And so what now, what happens if we start to say, you know what, instead of having one large location or just hub and spoke, one large and three small locations, what if we had 20 locations? And what if all of them were pretty small? And the idea that, it's, say the three of us lived all in lovely Dublin, California, and we lived near Shujaat. Our kids were in similar schools or on sports teams together. We might be on three totally different teams in the organization, but we have a place we can go to that we relate to as our place of work that we all identify with. I have a hypothesis that us being there and spending time together, even if we're not working together, in some ways actually better, because I know you two aren't going to distract me from my task at hand, likely because you don't have an opinion on it. It's almost like being in a place. People love third places because they get to think and work and they hear conversations, but they don't pay attention to the conversation because it doesn't affect them. So I'm just really curious. I've been pushing this idea to executives. It's the opposite of what I thought at the beginning of the pandemic. So I'll admit that I've completely changed on this. But I've said this to multiple executives, and I keep getting the same response. We can't spread the peanut butter too thin. We can't have people not coming all to the same location. We're distributing the energy, and that's not good. What are your thoughts?
So I think it goes back to the purpose of the connection. So I'll share an example. Sales leaders came in and said, you know what, we believe that because people are not co-located, that's why they're not able to hit their quota. And through ties, it turned out that it did not matter where you were located, did not matter where your manager was located. So no proximity bias. Your ability to get quota was based on the amount of strong ties you had in the company to get to closing a deal. And of course, your closeness and ties with the clients that were assigned to you. And those ties were distributed, right? So the high performers weren't necessarily because they were in the office, right? So in there, we said, okay, but does that mean that everyone's distributed? We're like, no, for your sales team, for them to connect with others, they can be distributed. That is to get their work done, achieve their outcomes. But the same salesperson wants to have a connection with the company. And to have a connection with a company, they need to have a shared purpose or a shared interest. So where they are located, if there's other people around their space, just give them a stipend, get them to meet together. And now you have someone who is able to deliver your outcomes by being in a very low cost location, by the way, while also feeling a sense of belonging because they've met others who may not be from the same function, but they have some common topic to talk about, right? And believe it or not, most likely that common topic is going to be the company as well, right? So one of the measures I had as a leader for myself is if I had new people on my team or if I took on a new team, the moment I sense the team is making jokes about me, it's one of my success measures because I felt like I've galvanized them together. And then they have the psychological safety to share the joke with me, right? So I was like, perfect. But if they are not talking to each other, right, and connected, so to your point, I think the both work. And again, depends on what purpose. It serves the purpose for that shared purpose, human social connection, that venting points. Wherever people are, give them an opportunity to talk to each other. And then work related or outcomes related productivity or productivity related is separate. You can design separately for that.
So two things really quickly. What you're describing is intentionality of connection, right? So coming together for a purpose, but then coming together and going apart based on what you want to achieve. I think that is one of the fundamental reimaginings of how work is done. And there's an amazing book, Priya Parker. It's called
Of
Gathering.
gathering.
It's fantastic. It kind of, I think that is the starting point in my work with a lot of organizations is let's just get in your calendars and see what we can do to fix them. Because I think this culture of over meeting and meetings without purpose is kind of killing people and sucking the life out of them. So I think that's the first thing. The second thing is I think there's something called the Allen curve. I was going to Google it, but I was listening to what you were saying instead. The Allen curve, I think, is a piece of research that basically determines that once you're more than about 20 meters away from somebody physically in space in a workplace, and that is 20 meters on a horizontal plane, it's not 20
Mhm.
meters vertically across 3
It
floors
gets
in a
short. It
building.
gets shorter as you go up. Actually,
Yeah, it doesn't matter whether you're one bay of workstations or a continent away, you're as least likely to collaborate once you're past that point. So large, big campus workplaces, I think maybe they've seen their zenith. I don't know that there is no that I'm not willing to say that they don't have a purpose. I think maybe they do because it doesn't as to network analysis perspective, you don't necessarily need to collaborate with all the people beyond that 20-meter mark or whatever that high water mark is. But having them all in one place can bring some other effectivenesses because the weak ties, right? So you need people who you don't know to have weak ties with. You need to bump into them. So I do think that they do make sense in that regard for sure. And I think workplaces need to become more of, if you think of a hotel, right? And I don't mean this literally, but there's different styles of rooms for different people. You can choose the presidential suite or you can just choose the business traveler option, whatever that's called, the bottom of the barrel. You can go down to the restaurant for breakfast and catch up with all the other travelers who are traveling and you might find somebody interesting there. You can have dinner in the restaurant or maybe 3 or 4 different restaurants. You can stay at the bar, you can do some work, you can lounge by the pool, you can sleep in your room, you can work in your room, you can go to the business lounge. You can walk the streets, do some retail therapy, and come back. And not only that, there are different types of hotels. There's 4 stars, 5 stars, 6 stars. I've heard now that there are 1 stars, which are better than 5 stars, but that's a whole different story. It confuses me greatly. But I think what's really interesting about that is that we've kind of designed workplaces to be a kind of there's not enough diversity in what they're offering. I'm about to publish an article that I've co-authored with a wonderful guy called John Priest, who's the head of a co-working organization. He's the COO of co-working space here in Australia. And it's all about what we think the evolution of workplace is, which is HQ venues. It's a headquarter, but it's a venue, right? And so it offers an experience-led, hospitality-rich experience that actually provides the platform for that connecting, building networks, yes, doing individual work, but at a far less degree than what we're used to seeing. So most workplaces are mostly workstations and then some social and collaboration space. I think if we turn that on its head and if we make much more social and collaboration space to support the network and the development of network and collaboration, proper collaboration, not just get on a Zoom call from your desk and pretend that's collaborating, because that's really not collaborating.
Mhm.
I think if we design workplaces much more around the human need for social connection, and again, that's not about tacos, it's not about free coffee, it's about something far deeper than that. I think we're going to start to make a step forward. So long as we're also dealing with the human leadership management capability issues and redefining how work's done and fixing broken calendars. It's hard. There is so much work to be done.
Oh, go ahead, Shujaat.
I was going to add, like, something outside of the workplace as a data point, right? If you look at virtual community vendors, like Circle is one, and then Mighty Networks, I've been tracking their data. You see the plethora of communities and private members club that have popped up. I'm building one as well. And it's people in corporate paying themselves to go out and have open conversations with other people in corporate with a shared purpose or a shared learning method. And they are willing to grow that where there's a need for that connection that they are not finding in the workplace. Brett, your example, if you did not find, if you did, I live in Dublin and you two did not, I would go find a community, right? Or find a community where other people were part of that my workplace was not offering. So a lot of the time, I think we look at workplace and talent data. There's ways to look outside and see what the trend is happening. You layer on top of it, we're in a official loneliness epidemic that's been announced, and we're already seeing vendors coming in. They're saying we don't want just virtual connections. We just want to gather people together. They want to meet and talk to each other. So there is that need. And last year, something that Brett said about the lines, right? I remember in the last offsite I ran in corporate, intentionally forced my team that was planning the agenda to have blocks in there with no agenda. And the value we saw of serendipitous interactions that popped up, people walking around the campus that Brett and team did an amazing job on, and they go into a hall which is empty where regularly our all hands used to happen. But it's set up in a way with sofas, you feel like it's like a podcast interviewing station. And suddenly, two of my team members start sitting there and having an ad hoc podcast style interview with each other just for fun. And we all are just observing. And we said, screw the rest of the agenda. We all sat together and did a live podcast style interview. And we realized things that we didn't even know about each other, right? But that is because of an unplanned but planned space for us to lead to serendipitous interactions and discussions.
Just imagine what you both are talking about, and then we can end on this. Is and we've been using the term abundance mindset, Domino, and I think it's the idea that companies could actually have far less to maintain, far fewer places, but that the places are amazing and that they are fostering the sort of human connection and behavior and energy that we want. Just none of us grew up wishing that we were going to sit at some plastic laminate covered desk underneath fluorescent lights and ceiling tiles.
Nope.
That is not the place in a desk that someone was watching where we were sitting because we were assigned to sit in that place. The idea of coming into a place, charting your own path, making your own way, living. And again, if we can get to a place where organizations are giving these rich ecosystems to employees and employees are then willing to give of themselves
Yeah.
and allow some of their freedom in terms of time and place to be given back to that, I think we'll see a really big change in the way people see and think about this. But we got to get beyond the world that a lot of companies are trying to return to, which was where we started this whole conversation, is putting this genie back in the bottle of what was so great about 2019, which wasn't that great, which was a bunch of desks in rows and conference rooms that people were escaping to. Neither one of them were places human beings choose to be if they're given the choice. So I can't wait to see what you both do in the coming months and years. I know we'll all stay in touch and we'll keep talking through all this. This has been a fantastic conversation. I hope you join us for our next podcast that we do and our next online event, which is going to be about place. And this is a perfect segue leading straight into that. And that'll be on April 10th. Thank you both and weekend, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you.
Thank